Oh, baby, it is time for your Wednesday Q&A. You knew I'd be here for you, don't you worry. Even though, holy hell, I have been having computer troubles right and left. So first off, thank you to actually a lot of the, not just Sovereign Tech listeners, but also the Sex and Science Hour listeners. So my big rig, my main computer, which I've had for a little while, I thought the power supply went, and actually it did go. The power supply was fried, and that's done. And so anyway, used some of the wonderful, the very gracious, contributions that I get through the Amazon link, or that we get, Stephanie and I, of course, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, my co-host on Sex and Science Hour. I used some of that to be able to get a new power supply. Got a nice one, nice EVGA one. Got it home. It arrives a couple days later or whatever. I put it into my big rig computer, and then more smoke comes up. Because if I didn't tell you the story before, maybe I didn't. But anyway, one day I go upstairs and suddenly there's just smoke. Or not suddenly, but the computer was off. I was like, why the hell is this thing off? I never turn this thing off. Or at least not often. And then I go to turn it back on and poof, smoke starts coming up. And so I assumed it was the power supply. Now the power supply was bad, but it was bad because what really happened is the motherboard was fried. But I didn't know that until I got the new power supply. So then I order a new motherboard, which, thank you. And I ordered the new motherboard, and, I get that in today, actually just earlier today, and I start setting things up, and the goddamn thing won't post. I'm like, why won't this post? What the hell's going on? So, and then I notice, as I'm studying things, that my video card, like the fan's just not spinning. I'm not getting anything out of it. I was like, oh shit, the fucking video card's probably blown too. So now I need to order a video card, which I will get to when I can. But man, does it suck. I know we talked about it on last week's Q&A. So I did tell you the story if you listened last week. Not having like a really powerful computer, boy, does that suck. When you're creative, when you're making shit happen, it sucks ass. That's just the way to put it. Woo. Anyway, enough of all that. So I am doing this off of one of my little Linux machines here, not the most powerful thing on planet Earth, but when I need to come down and record in the dungeon, it does the job. And that's really what matters here. So job is being done. Here we are, and we are talking it up. Now, I do want to say a thank you to all the listeners that really enjoyed this past week's episode of Sovereign Tech. It was episode 202. Had a couple of guests on. Had, of course, the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, and had the just wonderful, the amazing Paige Peterson of Zcash, which half the show, as she said, she had her Zcash hat on. The other half, she was just being Paige. Or Pixel. She also, of course, voices the enigmatic Pixel. So it was a great time having them on, just wonderful. And of course, the episode of Sex and Science Hour that we did that same week, I think it was episode 7 of season 3, people just went nuts over. Like, they thought that was amazing. And I'll tell you something. Here's a little behind the scenes, okay? So I have pretty much total creative control of Sovereign Tech. Like, it's my thing. I do what I want to do with it, say what I want to say, blah, 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 blah. Not that I ever feel constrained in what I can, say on Sex and Science Hour by any means. But that's more of like, Stephanie takes charge on Sex and Science Hour. And I love what she does. I mean, she's just natural born for that sort of thing, in my opinion. And I know some stories about her from when she was very, very little that I think she was natural born for it. But as much as one can be. And so with Sex and Science Hour, now something I have suggested to Stephanie for some time. It's like, look, get some of your, some of your girlfriends, some of your female friends, to be on the show and all this. Like, and I don't mind not being on it. Like have them do it. I think people would love to hear more than one woman on that show. And honestly, I don't think they'd mind not hearing me on it either. And of course, if you want to message me, if Sovereign Tech patrons want to message me about that, you can. But I think I got, not that Stephanie was opposed to the idea. She wasn't at all. But I think my theory, my thought kind of got proven right because, people went nuts about this episode. I mean, they just loved it. And of course, Paige knocked it out of the park. She's just one of those people that, she's she's getting it together, like so many of us, I think in this space, or I don't know. Sadly, maybe it's not so many of us, but I mean, she's got it. She's got the head on her shoulders, the whole thing, and it was so awesome, to have her on both shows. But yeah, I'll tell you, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I love being on Sex and Science Hour. I wouldn't miss it for anything. But I also, at the same time, I fully support it, at various points being, if not, even if it ended up being all the time, it's fine with me, being like an entirely, like if it was just all women on the show, I think that'd be phenomenal. Like, I really do. And I support that all the way. And at some point, I'll kind of let this out too. I'd be interested. I've never really had anybody, like actually be the main host of Sovereign Tech in 4 years. I've never had anyone else like actually do the show without me there. I'm tempted to try that out sometimes. Not that, I mean, and actually, you being the Sovereign Tech patrons, you guys being kind of the, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, I'll say, you being the super fans of Sovereign Tech in a very real sense. Not to say that people that aren't patrons aren't super fans either, or, as well, but let me know what you think about that. Would you be intrigued by perhaps, maybe, I don't know if she's up for it. I'm not putting her on the spot here or anything, but I don't know. There's tons of great people I'd love to have host Sovereign Tech that I think would be very interesting. Maybe have Stephanie, do it once, or even Paige if she felt up for it, or hell, someone, and you might not. You might think that a tech show wouldn't exactly fit the bill, but I think she could do it great. Like maybe somebody like MK, like MK Lords or something, who's a producer of Sovereign Tech. I think that'd be dynamite to hear that sort of thing. Or if you have other suggestions, I'd be interested to hear, who you think, would be a good fit for that. So, but thank you so much for all the kind words on the recent episodes of all the various podcasts that I do. That means quite a bit to me, and for people really appreciating and enjoying the Patreon content. I got some great comments on. We had our little Max Stirner discussion last week, and some people, people like they really dug that. So thank you for enjoying that. And this week's Q&A, we're going to get into that as well, or we're going to get into perhaps a little bit more of that, or perhaps a logical extension of that, or the predecessor, or well, we'll talk about how to describe that. But I got a question through Patreon, through the Patreon Messenger, that I do want to address, and we will get into that, and then maybe I can get into some other things too. I want to talk about some fun stuff. So first question I'll get into here is, and I've actually gotten this from quite a few people, and I'll discuss it here. Some people have asked me for updates on what's happening with Dark Android. Like with the Dark Android project, darkandroid.info and all this. I've talked about, I've addressed this in previous Q&As. I want to just bring it up again quickly, and I've actually brought it up on the show. So I sort of feel like, and if I'm wrong about some of the people that asked this question, I apologize. But I know I've talked about it on the show, on Sovereign Tech Prime, a little bit. And I know I've went into more depth on past Q&As, but now, these Q&As, there's over 30, there's almost 40 of these now, so I don't expect everybody to remember everything I've talked about. So sometimes there'll be a little bit of a retread, and that's okay. But I somehow get the sense that you really don't, and this is great if this is true, that you don't listen to Sovereign Tech, because I addressed this question on there. But if you're just following Dark Android, I'm honored by that. That I just don't think that there's it's tough to justify doing daily or even weekly Dark Android content. If it's only a few people. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I do have limited time, and I really want to, reach out to as many people as I can. Yeah, it's tough to justify, doing that kind of content. And so, but the more direct question is that people are wanting to know what hardware to use. And I know I did talk about this recently on Dark Android, or on Patreon Q&A, but I want to touch on it again, just real quick. And I just want to say, look, to some degree, the battle for the smartphone, and actually this next thing I'm about to say, I might talk about on Sovereign Tech proper this week. But the battle for the smartphone and even the battle for the smartwatch have kind of been lost, at least in the idea that somehow you could use, that you could interact, say, in using popular methods of interaction, like, for example, Facebook Messenger and things like this. And I don't just mean the app Facebook Messenger, I mean Facebook Messenger overall. To be able to interact with people, to be able to talk to people with those via those platforms and all that, that's just becoming an impossibility. And having devices that you can feel somewhat more secure in, there's no good phone to tell you about. I stopped writing about phones. Part of it is that I needed to invest my time in other areas. But the other part is that the complaints were always the same. None of these things have removable batteries. That's a huge fucking issue, in my opinion. Because, well, I don't want to go into the deep dive on that, because it is a deep dive. But the bottom line is that you never really know if your phone's not tracking you until you pull that fucking battery out. I'm just going to say it to you that way. That's not conspiracy theory. That is fact. And I won't get into the technicals right here, but that's how it is. Okay, so you lose that ability, right? From the get-go, as far as phones go. The ability, the more easy ability to put on custom ROMs goes away as the micro SD card slot has effectively been removed from most smartphones that I guess you could say matter. Matter meaning that they're going to have consistent AOSP updates and all the rest of it. So that's not to say that Dark Android is a lost cause. It's just if you are looking for the extreme, how to put this? If you are looking for the extreme ability to really encrypt what's going on in all this, there's not really a good smartphone choice out there for you. And honestly, the tablet space, at least as far as Android goes, is dying. There's some interesting tablets that come out. There's the Asus, was it 3S10 or whatever? Or S310, whatever the fuck the model number is. Okay, but, now most people, even diehards in the Android space, are coming out and saying, look, the Android tablet's just gone. And and Google didn't announce a new one. They just ended, the Nexus 9, and that was the end of the story. Now, maybe they're going to have something interesting coming out in January, but there's a lot. The whole mobile space is not shaping up the way I think a lot of these companies wanted it to. Smartwatches in particular. Smartwatches seem to be a dying category. In fact, this isn't one of my... There's times where I put down a prediction and I say, this is how it's going to happen. And a lot of times, actually, and I'm not patting myself in the back, I'm fucking right. And sometimes it's really specific shit, too. Super, super specific. But, so this isn't a prediction like that. But I'm going to make the prediction. There was was it angelfish? I keep forgetting all the different, there was sailfish, there was a bunch of different code names for the new products that over the summer, or actually back in May, we knew Google was developing. Okay, and a couple of them have come out, that being the two Pixel phones, right, that came out at the 10.4 event in October 2016. Now, we didn't know anything really about a tablet whatsoever, but we did know about a smartwatch, okay? But there was they talked about Android Wear 2.0, but at the 10.4 event, which would have been a hell of a time to talk about that as well, because they released a whole bunch of other hardware. You had, the Google Home and all that shit, right? And Daydream and everything. It was nowhere to be found. And so now there was some rumors that, okay, well, that just means that Android Wear 2.0 was going to become a thing come January. Now, we're a few weeks away from that, but I wouldn't be surprised, this is my prediction, if the Google Watch never comes out. The Google smartwatch, the Android Wear, never materializes. And what a fucking shame. Because that watch in particular was going to, what appeared, and based upon what Google said Android Wear 2.0 could do, appeared to be what I have always wanted for the smartwatch, where it is not an accessory to the smartphone, it is a replacement, it is another option to the smartphone. Okay, it's a replacement for or another option to go with as far as your communication medium. Okay, Because what's happening now is people are saying, well, shit, the smartwatch is dying off. It's not a huge success for Apple, even though there's some, people have made the comparison that, well, the Amazon Echo's a success and the Apple Watch has sold way more than any Amazon Echo, so what the hell are you talking about? It's not a success. Well, you have to put those things into context, okay, for one. But for two, so that's not happening. And also Motorola or Lenovo has come out and said, we're not making a new Moto 360. Most companies, it doesn't appear there's any outlook for a smartwatch of any kind. Pebble just got bought out by Fitbit, which that's a fiasco in its fucking self, which I'm probably going to talk about on episode 203 of Sovereign Tech coming up this weekend. So you have these categories that are kind of dying. And even really, in my opinion, the Apple tablet space is really turning into the Apple computer space, right? So tablet computing or the tablet being a separate entity is effectively dying. The iPad Pro is just replacing the MacBook. That's the plan. So really, they are going to be, and people have talked about this forever. I talked about this back, I think it was the iPad, was it the iPad 2? This is early days of Sovereign Tech. As soon as they came out with a what would you call that? Like a mid-cycle release, okay, where they came out, and I think it was the iPad 2, which is still the most used iPad in the world. But they came out with one, or maybe it was the 3, whatever. But it came out with the 128 gig model of the iPad. And as soon as that came out, I remember, this might have been within the first 20 episodes of Sovereign Tech. And again, we're up to episode 202, 203. And I was like, as soon as I saw them release mid-cycle 128 gigabyte iPad, with that much storage, they are getting rid of the MacBook. They're going to replace it with the iPad. And that's exactly what happened. Talk about prediction where I was very specific. It happened. And I think I even said it would happen within 3 years. There you go. And you can look me up on that one. Okay. So my point being there, in saying a lot of this, is that a lot of these subcategories of mobile devices would appear to be dying, or at least people aren't taking advantage of them in the right way. So because of that, a lot of what Dark Android had in mind, or the original goals of Dark Android, where you really had a privacy hardened device, kind of went to the wayside. Now, can you take Dark Android principles and still use it in other ways? Yes. And I actually plan on doing an update about that because we're due for a Dark Android 4. Okay, and in fact, this week I'm going to be on Declare Your Independence with Ernest Hancock. Woo, declare your independence. I'll be on, and as I understand it, he wants to do a 2-hour special podcast where it's all about encrypted communications and all this. And that, I could effectively release that as Dark Android 4. But this has kind of gone away. Now, that doesn't mean let's not lose all hope here, okay? Because what's happening is that companies are realizing that they are losing this ability because really, you're going to have, Google is effectively, and people are calling for it. I've heard it, okay? A lot of people are calling for it. A lot of tech fanboys, and a lot of people in Silicon Valley and all that, they're calling for, look, Google, well, because there was that big exploit, what was the Google-in? Or whatever it was the name of it. We'll talk about it this week on Sovereign Tech. But a lot of people are saying, look, Android or Google, Alphabet/Google, they need to just close up Android, forget this open source shit, close it up, just like and turn it into effectively just like iOS. That's what people want, for security. And I'm not saying it doesn't to some degree work because obviously iOS isn't perfect, but it definitely has a better reputation of security than Android does. So people see this happening, people see this trend occurring, and now you have the Guardian project and you have Copperhead, a company called, well, I don't know that's not exactly the company's name, but they're creating what's called Copperhead OS. Both things that I've written about extensively at the Dark Android project. You can still go to darkandroid.info. You can go to the Dark Android blog, and you can read about it because I had been reporting on them as they were coming out. But they are now planning on working together and releasing a smartphone. Okay? Now, here's the rub. All right? If they can't figure out a way to get people to use either Signal, which requires the Google Play Store. And again, understand, all it takes is for, is for Google to be like, we're going to close up Android and the Google Play Store is only going to be available on Google hardware and all that stuff. Do you think they would? Are you going to say to me that they wouldn't do that? No, I think they do that. I really do think they do that because they have Apple envy. They have all kinds of envy. Okay, they have Amazon envy, but they have all that. But that might happen in the future, to where Android apps outside of, as you know them, outside of outside of a Google device of some kind, might not really exist anymore. So Copperhead OS and the Guardian Project are going to have to figure out how can we get people to communicate on Facebook Messenger, and how are we going to be able to get them to use Signal? Because, and this is, I'll admit it, this is a huge problem with Signal, is that you have to have Google Play Store dependencies to run Signal. And that's kind of dumb, because I think the Google Play Store is spyware in and of itself. If we follow the original, kind of dark Android auspices, the original goals and ideas. But this phone is going to be a thing. And I think that's great. I applaud it. I hope it gets out there. I think that we might find that things like Black Phone, which really kind of flopped, and some of these other privacy hardened phones, that they were just they might have been just a little too early. I would think they were right on time, but they might be too early, because as Google closes in more, I think there's going to become this third category, which of course is what Samsung has been prepping for with Tizen for years, because I think they knew this was going to happen. We'll have to wait for these phones. If you want privacy hardened devices, these are going to, like the things coming from Copperhead and the Guardian Project, those are sort of what you're going to have to look at. There is no Android phone, really modern one anyway, to look at that allows for you, in my opinion, to really apply a lot of the original dark Android principles. It just doesn't happen. And tablets are effectively dead. I mean, yes, like I've said previously about this very subject, relatively recently, is that you can still go out and buy a 2013 Nexus 7 and have the day, and do dark Android all the way and everything. Throw F-Droid on there and away you go. Sure, you can do that. But as far as new news, no, there's no new news. Other than what's happening, say with Copperhead. I mean, in the smartwatch space, maybe that won't die off because you have, Asteroid OS, which I also wrote about at the Dark Android blog. I might talk about that more this week because it seems to be rising to prominence, and with good reason, considering the fact that it seems every other company is abandoning these $200 to $300, to $400 devices known as Android Wear smartwatches. And people want these things to last. They didn't want to lay down $300 for something that they're not going to wear anymore. So if somebody comes out with an operating system that can actually, give your Moto 360 a lot more life on it, give it some years, well, fuck yeah, people are going to want that. I mean, I'm going to save that subject for another time. But my point being is that you're really going to have to start looking at third-party solutions. And you're going to have to, if you want secure devices, there's a good chance that you're going to have to give up the fucking Play Store and the App Store. I mean, I already said that. That's already been a major point of dark Android. If you want really secure devices like that, that's not anything new. But now you're going to have to even look out of the devices that could even potentially install those. You're going to have to look at completely different devices. Not LG, not Samsung, not HTC, whoever. You're going to have to look at these little guys like Copperhead and some others. So that's my thoughts on that. If you're wondering why there isn't any updates on dark Android stuff, look, there's nothing to update. like the Android device, the modern Android devices suck. I mean, they suck for privacy. They suck for privacy and security. They don't suck when it comes to, let's say, a lot of the things they can do for that. I mean, obviously they're awesome. Daydream is an exciting platform. VR is an exciting platform overall, even though I think mobile is the future of virtual reality, it doesn't require Android or iOS to be the future, for mobile to be the future of virtual reality. I mean, hell, even what was it? That Alcatel Idol S? Is that what it is? S or 4S? I think it's the Alcatel Idol 4S. That That's a Windows phone, or you can get an Android version of it too, but there's a Windows phone version of it, and that comes with like virtual reality out of the gate. So, there's other options for virtual reality, certainly. And I do think that Windows is going, Windows holographic is going to be kind of like the key platform in many ways for AR, VR, MR, whatever you want to call it. But I got off subject there. Bottom line, there's not a whole lot to talk about with Dark Android, because unless you're going to go, I mean, what I've said in previous years is still absolutely true, because the modern smartphones, and there aren't really any modern tablets, they all suck. When's the last time NVIDIA released a Shield tablet? I mean, and the Shield line had been somewhat popular. Yeah, a lot of the categories, a lot of the product categories that seem to be a thing over the past 2-3 years, or that we thought were coming or whatever. Either their time's just not here yet, and they got to wait a couple more years, or whatever, or this stuff just isn't going to fly. And to some degree, I'll say this. To some degree, I'm actually hopeful. Like, I want as I've said many times on Sovereign Tech, I want a smartwatch, but I want a smartwatch that removes my need for a phone. All right. That can still, handle my emails, communicating, maybe even has signals, something like that, whatever. Okay, and has GPS and blah, 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 blah. Okay, I want a smartphone that replaces all that. That is so important to me. All right, I think that's such a category that I'm so excited for, even for gaming. I love the idea of watch gaming. I want that really bad. But at the same time, if the smartwatch never becomes a thing, then that means that even product categories that the biggest companies in the world put billions, millions, or billions of dollars behind can fail and not actually permeate the market. Which gives me hope, because that means IoT can fail. That the Internet of Things can actually fail, and that it won't become a thing, and that this massive security exploit, that could permeate the earth wouldn't become a thing. That is exciting to me, that's possible. So, and even with tablets, if tablets stop being a thing, great. As much as I can appreciate a tablet, right? I mean, in certain ways, like if it becomes a failure, awesome. That means that IoT can go the way of the dodo. That lots of these different ideas can just fall away and never become a big deal. That's exciting. So, as much as I want my smartwatch, if smartwatches fail, good. that proves that at least sometimes the market can speak, and also that too, the A, B, whatever I said, that also that the money that gets pushed, that gets funneled into this crap, can fall away. So anyway, there you have that. There's my little spiel on Dark Android. I think I spent a lot longer on that than I wanted to, but it's important to get out there. Now, let's get into... all right, so I'll pull up the question here. And it's, hey, Brian, another question for you. Since you've mentioned it in the past, I wonder if you could talk about hedonism, your definition, what it means to you, how you put it into practice in your everyday life, how you came to it, whatever you feel like discussing. So, and I responded to this person quickly and just said, yeah, I think I'll get to that in a Q&A. And based off of last week's conversation, I think it's a good one to have now as well. But I've promised this for such a long time, and I think I talked about this in a recent Q&A as well. I have a lot of little episodes that I need to finish, and that I just, that I really want to be very well done. I want them to be very well laid out. Things that you could potentially, in the future, I mean, at first they'd be Patreon content, or at the very least, you yourself could take the information and talk to other people about it. I want kind of complete cases made. Not just simple 20 minutes on a podcast or something like that, but full, almost a course on a subject. Okay. And one of the ones I've wanted to do for a long time that I've worked on, I have, quite a bit of it done. And I keep wanting to add more. And I really want to address the critics, with it and all that without having to really do another episode on it or something. And the one is hedonism, because probably people say this kind of shit all the time, but I have, other than unfortunate times where I fell to the lure of religion, which I won't let happen again. Done a little too much work on myself to make sure of that. My whole life I've been a hedonist. Before I, self-described as many other isms, even anarchist and all that. I've been a hedonist, and so it's a subject that I really it deserves such a great exploration, and it's so hard to find great explorations of it in the English language, quite frankly. There are other philosophers, and I mean that in the abstract term, not in the specific, like referencing to a bunch of idiots at FDR or something. That have covered it perhaps far better than I ever could. But I'm not the best person to translate their work by any means. So the person, here is asking me about hedonism. What's my definition of it? What do I mean by it? How do I apply it? Blah, 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 blah. So I am going to touch on this subject. I am going to get into it here. And this is not going to be like a complete case by any means. That is something I am working on and I'd like to release in the future. But I am going to describe it. Now, why don't we start with definitions, okay? And I'll rock Wikipedia on this one because I think their definition is fine and dandy of, the overall meaning of hedonism. Because it is important to say that a lot of people have a lot of different definitions of what exactly hedonism means. Okay, there is a hedonism that has to do with technology, which I'm not saying I'm opposed to, but that's not what I mean when I talk about hedonism. Like there's the idea that we build medicine, or that we create medicines, or drugs, or we create technologies or something else to where you literally remove the human capacity for feeling pain. That is one definition of hedonism. That is not the one that I subscribe to. Okay, and I'm not saying I am opposed to those people. I'm not saying I'm really for them either. All right, but you gotta understand that, like so many isms, capitalism, communism, environmentalism, even a lot of these different things, there are a bunch of different meanings, even ones that some people think is pure, that I talked about many times and have proven that it's not. Voluntarism or voluntarism, whichever way you want to say it. Okay, there are people who call themselves voluntarists that vote. The person that invented the term, Karl Wagner, said that electoral politics have no part in voluntarism. So obviously you have two voluntarisms. So it's really important with in fact, this is kind of fitting to mention him. What did Socrates say? That the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms? This is true, okay? And so I'm happy to describe, even briefly here in this Q&A, what I mean by hedonism. All right, but I want you to know that yes, there are a lot of people who use the term hedonism for all kinds of things, and there's not just one hedonism. I think there's one kind of abstract sort of definition that people say, I don't want to say refine, but that they forge into whatever their own goals are. Okay, but just like Epicureanism, okay, is a version of hedonism. It is one type of hedonism. It is not the only type of hedonism. So why don't I read the definition here, the abstract definition that I have no issue with, and this is directly from Wikipedia. Hedonism is a school of thought that argues that pleasure and happiness are the primary or most important intrinsic goods in the proper aim of human life. A hedonist strives to maximize net pleasure minus pain. So let's be clear on what exactly, like how could people twist like such a simple definition? Or not twist, but use such a simple abstract as what we just read, okay? Now, there are people who, so like take Epicureanism, okay? Which I don't, somebody called me an Epicurean, I wouldn't take much umbrage with that. I don't think that it exactly describes me perfectly, though Epicurus was brilliant, and there's definitely a lot of what he had to say through a hedonist lens that was so far ahead of his time that it makes you wonder. I'm not going to tell you what it makes you wonder, but it makes you wonder. But okay, so Epicureanism, like that version of hedonism, is not the idea that is not necessarily debauchery. It is not the idea that you just go out there and you go seek every single passion, fulfill every passion you have at any given moment, and devil may care, right? All that. Okay, that's not what Epicureanism says or espouses as a hedonistic philosophy. What it espouses is that you take steps in life to experience the least amount of pain. That is wholly different from going out and seeking a good time. Or, all the wild pleasures and all that. Like, those are two totally fucking different things. But your average run-of-the-mill conservative, or even liberal, or, even your average run-of-the-mill libertarian, but I repeat myself, seemingly on all counts these days, don't seem to understand that. Like, that those are very different things. Now, I'm not opposed to either. Like, I mean, if that's like the life you want to lead is going out and just, fulfilling every single little desire you have, rock and roll. You go for it. I won't judge you for that. You go do your thing. I don't care. Okay? If your goal in life is to minimize pain, go for it, baby. Who would argue with that? Well, I imagine there are people who would. They're called Stoics, but that's not. But we'll save that for a little bit later in this conversation. Okay, all those definitions are really fine, but also neither of those really stand in contrast to the notion that pleasure and happiness are the ultimate goals in life, which, interestingly enough, also Ayn Rand said was the ultimate goal. Of course, she had how do you get to that? And, how you get to that is through productive achievement, living the heroic life and all this, which is in many ways, in my opinion anyway, that's just another form of hedonism in a very real sense. I don't think you could say that capital O objectivism is a hedonism, but I would argue with you that little o objectivism, okay, which, capital O objectivism is, Leonard Peikoff's, all his shit, yay government, if you don't have government, you're just going to get taken over by the next warlord, blah, 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 all that crap, which I don't agree with at all. But the more of the existentialism that is, small O objectivism, a lot of the more, kind of the three axioms that Ayn Rand would espouse, not so much the political stuff, like, praising IP, which that's nonsense. But, going by the three axioms, existence, identity, all that. A lot of that, I think that's effectively hedonism. I mean, she was really pushing Epicureanism in a very real sense. I mean, she had some other parts that were just crazy, like women can't be in charge or, stuff like this. I mean, it was damned odd, frankly. But so it just brings up my point that under this abstract notion of what hedonism is, okay, which is, again, the school of thought that argues that pleasure and happiness are the primary and most important intrinsic goals and the proper aim of human life, you can come up with all these wild different philosophies or philosophical schools. So keep that in mind, that when somebody says, what do you mean by, when somebody says I'm a hedonist, you need to ask them, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what is your school of hedonism, exactly? So I like this next paragraph in Wikipedia, so I'm going to read that. And it is, ethical hedonism is the idea that all people have the right to do everything in their power to achieve the greatest amount of pleasure possible to them. It is also the idea that every person's pleasure should far surpass their amount of pain. Ethical hedonism is said to have been started by Aristippus of Cyrene, a student of Socrates, who we just mentioned. He held the idea that pleasure is the highest good. Now, there you go. There is the start of what I mean by hedonism, this ethical hedonism, okay? And it plays off very nicely if you listen to last week's Q&A when we talk about what Max Stirner was espousing. This falls right in with egoism. This idea that your pleasure, you are the most important thing in the universe, right? That's the whole tenet of egoism. Of course, then so is everybody else. So this ethical hedonism is really important. And so I'm going to give a little bit of history, and then I want to talk about personal application and what it means for me and where I first came upon hedonism. In fact, maybe I'll start with that. How did I come upon hedonism? What was my first experience with hedonism? Well, it certainly wasn't from reading Aristippus of Cyrene, nor was it reading, like the Art of Happiness by Epicurus. My first experience, there was a Christian book. The title is escaping me at the moment. I'll admit that. But there was a Christian book that talked about how hedonism, and this is in the 90s, how hedonism was taking over America. And I read this. Now, there were other life forces, other confluences of events that were happening that really, kind of brought me to this. But I read this book as a young Christian, and everything in this book that the author was saying, it was a pastor or some type, that the author was saying was bad. I've shared a picture of this book. Let me see if I can look it up quick. I want to get the title for you. Well, I can't seem to find it. I know I have a digital copy of it because it was kind of such an important book. Unfortunately, I can't remember the exact title of it. But anyway, everything that this guy described in this book that was evil, I was like, wait a second, but that's what I want to do. Like, I want to do that. And like, this is the life I kind of want to lead. Like, it's funny because the book was supposed to scare you and supposed to say, oh, you got to stay with Christ because otherwise you'll end up like this. And I'm like, no, I want to fucking end up like that. And so then I started, and the guy, he talks about Aristippus, he talks about Epicurus, and he talks about some of the opponents too, like Epictetus and some others. And so I start reading all of these people. And, I'm reading Epicurus, and I'm even, not that there's really anything left of Aristippus much anyway, but, what you could find out of like some Greek books. Most of the works you find about Aristippus, you find out through the Nicene and Ante-Nicene fathers. Like it comes from reading either Christian texts that critique, or it comes from like reading Plato or some of these other guys. It usually comes from critiques. You never find the autographs from these guys. Probably because hedonism, in my opinion, and I'm just laying this out here before I even get into, a lot more of hedonism, but probably because hedonism actually sets people free. And philosophers of the past 2,000 years don't want that. Even philosophers today who say, want you to vote for Trump, are all about control. And so they hate hedonism because that's about actually being free. In fact, there's writings of where Aristippus got, I think it's in, Aristotle might have talked about it. But where Aristippus gets in arguments with some of the most popular philosophers of the day, Plato and a bunch of them. And these guys who you think are so logical and cool and collective, right? Plato and whoever else, it's reported that they were just furious over having arguments with Aristippus, but Aristippus was the one who was cool as a cucumber. He was cool as the breeze. That's interesting. Because Plato couldn't win against the philosophy of hedonism. Maybe because a lot of these other guys, oh shit, can't handle that. I mean, and they're all outcrops of Socrates anyway. Aristippus was a student of Socrates. So I read that book, and then I started actually researching the actual thing. And it wasn't necessarily the best foundation of it, especially reading Epicurus, even though The Art of Happiness is a wonderful book in so many ways. And actually Epicurus, as I've said on Sovereign Tech a few times whenever I brought him up, like he keeps kind of getting proven right. Even when you thought that, because Epicurus was an atomist, all into scientific materialism and all that, right? And like a lot of his notions end up being right. Like even the concept, there are new theories out there that the universe actually has no beginning and no end. Like that time has just kind of always been. Epicurus said that. There's other things where, he seems to like get proven right much later on. And of course, that's because finally some people are getting away, from Christianity. or from the stranglehold, shall we say, of religion. So anyway, not the best foundation, but I came back to it because I became a Christian again. I don't want to get into my my whole life story on that again. But after I got out of the military and I finally snapped out of the haze of war, effectively. I came back to hedonism and atheism, which those are. So this is worth bringing up too. Hedonism and atheism are part and parcel. Like they are so intertwined. I could imagine now there's the idea of carnal Christians who think that, because like Romans 9, they get to do whatever the hell they want, and that in fact sinning makes them greater in God's eyes. As long as you keep going for forgiveness, because they misconstrue a quote by the Apostle Paul. I'm not talking about them. But there are Christians who, I think, what's his name? John Piper, who is, I don't even know if he's still alive, a very, very famous Calvinist pastor. And he believes in he has what's called a Christian hedonism, which is the idea that you do everything to the pleasure of Christ. Like everything is for the pleasure of Christ. Ooh. Even when I was Christian and I heard that, I was like, there's something a little off about that, in using that term, because that just doesn't, that's really, and I get it. John Piper was trying to sell books and he was trying to be controversial by using the word hedonist, but those two terms just shouldn't even belong to each other, not in any way, shape, or form. So hedonism is very much intertwined, with atheism. So as I came to atheism, I think the logical extension of atheism is hedonism, and vice versa, and all this. If I end up losing track here talking, this is such a huge subject, and I'm trying to really boil it down, quickly. But I just want you to know, my point in talking about that was in saying that there are people who claim to be Christian hedonists, but it's not what you think, and even if it is what you think, they are fucking dead wrong. By their own translation of their books, they're crazy. So now shift it up. So now I mentioned Aristippus of Cyrene. Now you got to be careful, okay, because there's actually two Aristippuses. There's Aristippi. There's Aristippus of Cyrene, and then there's Aristippus the Younger. Okay, and actually in a lot of, and here's where it becomes a problem. You may be able to tell that difference, but historians often, or even more antiquated historians, have a hard time, to where a lot of things that may have actually been said by Aristippus of Cyrene get attributed to Aristippus the Younger, who is the grandson of Aristippus of Cyrene. Aristippus the Younger is the daughter of, is the son of Aristippus of Cyrene's daughter, his daughter being Arete. Now, Arete is, her story alone is phenomenal. You can almost skip the Aristippi and you can go right to Arete, because here, we're talking about a woman in, the 4th century, 3rd, 4th century BCE, who was the writer of 40 books. She was a professional philosopher. And here's the deal. It's not like there weren't other female philosophers, but she made her living off of being one. That was exceptional. Why was that exceptional? How was she able to do that? Well, if you want to equate something, is it because her message resonated with people so much? And here's the problem. We don't really know what her message was. We can only assume that because Aristippus of Cyrene, because her father was kind of the first guy attributed with hedonism, we don't have a whole lot of his writings, so I'm going to mention a couple of things that he said that I think you'll appreciate. Okay, even though you have Aristippus of Cyrene, and since Aristippus the Younger also carried on the hedonist tradition, who we don't have a whole lot of his writings either, other than, we kind of have ideas that he sort of systematized hedonism in a way. You would assume that Aristippus the Younger just learned what was passed down from Aristippus, the elder, to his mother, Arete. So somehow she made a living as a woman doing that. Now, one could argue is that Aristippus, because of his philosophy of hedonism, that pleasure is the ultimate kind of human good, and that all things flow from that perhaps he came to a lot of very interesting conclusions, like equality of the sexes, among other things, and so that perhaps that allowed him to be such a tremendous parent that Arete ends up becoming a wild success at a time when women were not to be wild successes. Much like Hypatia, who we learn about later during the Library of Alexandria. Even up to Hypatia's day, it was still rare for a woman, to be a teacher and to be a philosopher. And unfortunately, we know what happened to Hypatia. Burned alive, dragged out into the streets and who knows what else, stoned, perhaps burned alive, as the Library of Alexandria was destroyed by various religious zealots. So, you look at these lives and you have to wonder how big a part is, one would argue that philosophy, says everything about one's life. And so, what do you have here that comes out of that? And, well, I think it's interesting to look at the lives of these people. But anyway, so Arete is a success story in and of herself. And perhaps it speaks to the success of the philosophy of hedonism itself. And I'm being very short here. I'm not going really, really deep on a lot of this, folks. So if you're going to say I'm doing some kind of fallacy, go ahead and tell me, and maybe I'll address it quick because I'm not. Okay, I have a lot more that I could say based on everything. I could do an hour. I could do 4 hours on every single name that I brought up so far. Okay, I'm trying to be quick here. I'm trying to keep it condensed. So anyway, let's talk. Let's go to Aristippus of Cyrene, who is arguably the guy that kind of started this whole shtick. One of my favorite quotes from Aristippus of Cyrene is, "Wise people, even though all laws were abolished, would still lead the same life." Now, that's a very popular quote, just particularly on the internet, which makes a lot of sense because, especially the early internet, which was very anarchistic. And, that's as anarchist as it gets, saying that, look, laws don't make men, laws don't make society, laws don't make civilization. Wisdom does, knowledge does. Or how about this one? "A wise man's country is the world." I've got a whole list here. These are just, beautiful, beautiful quotes. "It is better to be a beggar than ignorant, for the beggar only wants money, but an ignorant person wants humanity." Ooh, what does that mean? Anyway, you could go on and on with Aristippus's life. Just wild, some wild stories to be had where he's seemingly a very clever guy. And it's funny because he gets written about mainly by his detractors. And the detractors missed that he was ripping on them right and left. And he was making fools and asses of them. It's really quite the thing. So now that doesn't mean that Aristippus also wasn't a guy that, went about enjoying extravagance and courtesans and, all this other stuff. There's some things that were laid against him that I think were completely inaccurate. And you could tell kind of within the writing, say by some of these, some of his philosophical enemies, that they were trying to do a smear piece. But then, between the lines, you could see where there was the truth of it. So Aristippus is an interesting character to look at as far as coming up with a lot of this stuff, and was certainly a lot of thought in the ancient world. Again, most of these writings are, we talked about the Library of Alexandria, and it wasn't just the Library of Alexandria, you have the Library of Pergamum, you have tons of them, where a lot of these writings are just lost and they're gone. And you can kind of see why maybe, some people get conspiratorial around the Library of Alexandria because it spoke against the power of the day, and that people might soon figure out, holy shit, perhaps everybody would become anarchists, who knows? Or something like that. I'm kind of transposing some of my own ideas on them. Certainly, I can admit to that my bias may be creeping in. Okay, but hedonism in and of itself is anti-power, at least power over the individual. It is power for the individual, but it is power. It is against power that stands against the individual. Saying, even the power, not just government, but even the power of like social mores, which I talk about all the time, to where hedonism's like, okay, well, yeah, no, that's something you want to do. You can do it as long as you can do it. You don't go using anybody else's shit, but as long as you can do it, do it. As to where, a lot of social mores would say, no, you don't do that. You can't just go butt fuck somebody. Are you kidding me? That's terrible. That's horrendous. That's against God. Yada, 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 yada. And maybe that's in some ways, the way hedonism is best understood is in contrast to a lot of its detractors and a lot of its opposition. Perhaps the most popular opposition. Now, I want to get into. I guess I should see. I'm all over the place. You can see why I was doing a 2-hour show about this. Okay, I want to get into kind of how I apply it in my own life. That was something that was described. What exactly it means for me and all that. I do want to get into that. But I want to just discuss that there's some people who say, well, what about the Stoics? Because Stoicism seems to be a very popular thing in libertarianism and anarchism these days. I don't know why, but it is. Now, here's the thing. Here's the primary thing to understand about Stoicism. Okay, and I've read Epictetus. I know the works. Okay, here's the primary thing that people miss, is that Stoicism says to you that your actions today, what you do today, that you need to think about the future. You need to think about tomorrow. Not just tomorrow as in literally 24 hours from now. You need to think about when you're gone and how you're going to affect the world. In Stoicism, there is this kind of inherent idea that you owe something to the future. That it behooves you, more than it behooves you, it is the proper way to live, that, say, you leave the world a better place than when you came into it. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. But what I am saying is that there is absolutely there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no rule, there's no law, there's no part of your biological code that says you are required as a human being to make sure that the world is better as you go. Where is that? Tell me the science behind that. Give me the scientific principle, break out your scientific method, show me where exactly it says that you are required as a human being, that this is part of your human makeup, to be a good human being, whatever the fuck that means, that you have to make the world a better place. No, it's not there. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying it doesn't exist. Stoicism is a philosophy, that is one of the undercurrents of Stoicism, and that's horseshit. Now, does human pleasure exist? Oh, fuck yeah. What do you think you have all these sensory organs for? It is a part of the biological makeup of who you are. You could say pain is as well. I understand that, but then that becomes the choice. That becomes where the human creature goes beyond instinct and says, "Do I want more pleasure or do I want more pain?" Or is there something intermixed there, perhaps for some people? Kind of the quantum existence of human beings. There is nothing in Stoicism it has no scientific bearing whatsoever. As for hedonism, has a shit ton. Now, can we move on beyond our biology and all that? Sure, of course we can. That's why we have choice. You can choose to live a Stoic life. That's fine. But you can't say, I agree with Stoicism, so then I'm going to pick up some stupid fucking book that says, oh, I'm an R-type or I'm a K-type, human being, and that, this fits right in with my philosophy and all that, and this is biological, this is how you make things successful, okay? This is how civilization goes on, because once we're Stoics, civilization moves on. Well, here's your problem. Here's your next problem, not even getting into the biology of the matter. Okay, here's your problem with your Stoicism and your problem with really almost any other philosophy outside of hedonism. You can choose it, that's fine. But when you start saying that that's how you have a great civilization is when you apply these little personal philosophical rules, and this personal philosophy and all that, writ large, that somehow everything's okay. Guess what? History is not on your side. You do not find Stoicism. You do not find a lot of conservatism or a lot of these other ideas. You don't find them at the very start of civilization, which I would think your argument that somehow these are what saves civilization would preclude that. Well, what exactly at, say, the first civilizations we know of in human history, that being, say, Sumer, right, the Sumerians, or ancient Egypt or something, do you find these things there? At the very start of these very real quantum leaps in human existence, coming out of the Paleolithic into the Neolithic and all this. What do you find? You don't find Stoicism. You don't find a lot of these other philosophies, but you do find hedonism. Oddly enough. Here's one of the first quotes out of Sumer. Okay, and it's right out of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I know I've been wanting to release the Epic of Gilgamesh for a while, but I've yet to. Anyway, there's a character in it, Siduri, who gives the following advice. Quote, "Fill your belly day and night, make merry, let days be full of joy, dance and make music day and night. These things alone are the concern of men." I mean, that's fucking hedonism in a nutshell. Enjoy life. Your life. Now. You. Not the life of the next people. Look, this is something where I think Ayn Rand was so spot on. Okay? She said, when I die, it's not my life that will end, but the world will end. And that's absolutely true. And what she means by that is, it's over. When you're dead, you have nothing to do with the world. It's done and done. The world for you has effectively ended. It's not you that will die. It is the world that will end. That was Ayn Rand's point. And I think that's so true. You don't owe the future anything. You can choose to, but there's no grand law, and there's no evidence whatsoever historically that somehow if you engage in anything other than constantly thinking about the future and having a family, doing all this shit, blah 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 blah, that somehow things are going to end up so much worse. I would argue quite the opposite, because the anti-hedonism philosophies have been the ones that have really kind of carried on through time. Why did they carry on? Well, because all the hedonist books got burned. But they're the ones that have carried on through time. And you want to tell me that, wow, how wonderful this is, blah, 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 blah. I would argue with you that what really happened is that, say, during the Enlightenment, what happened during the Enlightenment was suddenly people started, so you had scientists that the kind of the purpose behind the Renaissance, the Enlightenment and all this was, all right, we have this incredible tool called science that we're discovering, and this consistency of existence in the universe. And so we're going to take that and we are going to, we're going to start applying it. How can we prove God? And of course, what happened is they found out they disproved God during the Enlightenment. Okay, and they started, when they started using the scientific method here, there, and everywhere, okay, suddenly they started saying, wait a second, what about this whole individualism thing? Because that's when a lot of this shit starts to crop up, is at the same time. Any of the advancements you have today, okay, that you think are good, really kind of came out of a lot of those varying thinkers. Okay, say anywhere between the 12th I guess maybe 13th to say 17th century, something like this, right? Okay, but those people, those ideas were, very individualistic, and honestly, a lot of them were very hedonistic. I mean, you look at, the monks of Mendenham, Hellfire, things like the Hellfire Club and stuff like this, where people were, allowing their passions to finally get expressed. I'm reminded, I'll quote Nathaniel Branden to you, speaking of Ayn Rand, but I think Nathaniel Branden's right. This is the guy who's the expert on self-esteem, and just if you've never read his books, fucking read them. But he has one of the best quotes in history, in my opinion, and that is that in order to think clearly, we have to feel deeply. That is hedonism. You have to feel these things. You don't bury them. You don't shove them off for tomorrow. Okay? You feel them. And then you can think clearly because you're paying attention to what's going on for you. And I know there's people who say, well, Stoicism doesn't say bury it. Stoicism doesn't say go around walking around like Mr. Spock or something. Yeah, I get that. But you create false paradigms with Stoicism. You really do. And I have so much more I want to get into. I'm going to try and wrap this up. You create false paradigms. There's the idea of instant gratification. That is such a false paradigm. People do not, maybe there's some people that go after instant gratification, but that term gets used way too much. All right. When people want something now, it doesn't have to do with the fact that they can't control their lust or they can't control their passion. It's because they want a guarantee in a world where everything gets taken out from underneath them by thieves. Have you ever thought about it that way? It's not... Yeah, there's such a thing as instant gratification and people not being able to delay gratification or something like this. Okay, but it gets applied across the board, and it's wrong to apply that way. There's times where it needs to be applied, but most of the ways that people think about it, absolutely fucking not. And it's so funny because like now a lot of these people that are against sort of like some of the ideas that I've laid out with hedonism or hedonism in general that perhaps that you would read about, and I know I haven't exactly described what it is, but it's just so funny that so many people that are against this sort of shit, now they appeal to biology. Like they bring up a lot of this R-type and R, this RK selection theory and all this bullshit. When it's like, these same people will tell you, like they're part of, say, like the no FAP movements, right? Where you don't jerk off. And all this stuff, right? And it's like, well, okay, wait a second. Let's see. Biologically, a person can come, like a man can ejaculate every 5 minutes to an hour. And they can ejaculate millions of billions of sperm. So biologically, what are they designed to do? Well, obvious. They're designed to come a lot. So what the fuck is this nonsense about, not fapping? Woo. Woo. Anyway, so hedonism for me, let's boil, now that I'm done railing against the opposition, I think I should reverse the order of how I'm talking about this. But hedonism for me is just that, is just what Aristippus talked about, what Ayn Rand talked about, what a lot of these different, characters or philosophers, people talked about, that, happiness is your number one goal. Now, like Max Stirner said, is that or even, here, I'll quote Robert Heinlein. What is love? Love is your happiness completely intertwined with someone else's. So, and Stirner was, huge on feeling love. And that is that, your happiness does not, your actual happiness, your ethical hedonism does not fuck with someone else's pursuit of happiness. Is that the nap, right? Something like that? It's not exactly the nap, but that's the thing. Do what, or what, who says that? The Wiccans? Do what thou wilt, just don't hurt anybody, but hurt none, right? Isn't that how they say it? Sure, that's great. That's a perfect way to describe hedonism. That's certainly how, how I chalk up hedonism. Of course, what does hurt mean? Well, that's another conversation. Okay, but, that's it. That's really it. And that seeking out these pleasures. Now, how does that, so there's hedonism for you. Is that pleasure is the intrinsic good. It is the ultimate good. It is the ultimate goal in life. Is pleasure. Pleasure can take a lot of different forms. Pleasure could be a chocolate chip cookie. Pleasure could be a cum. Pleasure could be a threesome. Pleasure could be a scientific discovery. Pleasure could be a boat ride. Pleasure could be, obviously it could be all these different things, right? Okay, it's not just about living some kind of debaucherous, gluttonous life or whatever. I don't have any problem with living that kind of life, okay? But it's not just that. Writing a book is a tremendous pleasure. That's hedonism. That's okay. Hedonism is telling you effectively that when society says to you, as a whole, that just because society agrees upon something being a really terrible or evil thing, like how anal sex used to be considered the unspeakable act, hedonism says, no, it's not. As long as there's consent, actual consent, and as long as you're rocking it, because that would be part of, that would be part of the happiness, right? Is, intertwining it with someone else's experience. Okay? Rock and roll. Have a good time. Enjoy yourself. Call me in the morning if you want. And so how do I apply that in my own life? I hope I kind of described it. I think the abstract definition that Wikipedia gave was actually fantastic. how do I apply it in my own life? I don't listen to the societal mores. And I listen to myself. What do I want? How would I want to be treated? Right? Kind of like the platinum rule or the golden rule, depending on which way you want to rock with it. I look at that, and there is, when I'm in touch with my pleasure, I can be more in touch with what I want out of life and how to respect other people. Because when I'm in touch with every aspect, all of my passions, all of my desires, all of my discipline, when I'm actually in touch with that, when I'm feeling deeply so I can think clearly, then I can better know how to respect other people as well. So that's one of the ways that it gets applied. It gets applied by, I don't believe in other people like ruling over me. Because their pleasure isn't any greater than mine. Unless I choose it to be, and I don't. Now, do I go around drinking? Do I go around, doing all these other things? No. And I don't mind that people do. I don't care. Drink, do drugs, do all the drugs you want. I don't give a shit. Okay? Duh. We're talking hedonism. Go ahead. I am not here to lay down social mores on you. Okay, but I don't do any of that stuff. Now, interestingly, the reason I don't do that is because, in my opinion, just my opinion, the individual here, me, Golden Stallion, Brian Sovereign, they interfere with my ability to feel pleasure. And there's, I have science to back that up. Okay, I have research that can back that up. That whiskey dick, right? You have stoner boner. These are actual conditions that people get, when they imbibe or ingest or smoke up, whatever, or even cigarettes themselves. Can affect blood vessels and the penis and all this. And I don't want that. Because I've chosen where one of my great vehicles of pleasure, okay, and I don't want to mess with it. That's it. But do you see how seeking pleasure actually created, to some degree, for lack of a better term, a discipline? In that I'm not going to do that stuff because I know what I want, because I have felt deeply and I have thought about it clearly because I felt it. So that's how it applies. Hedonism says nothing. In the abstract, hedonism says really nothing about making sure you're going out and having a party. It's just saying that if you want to, you can. As to where other philosophies are saying, that might not be a good idea. Based upon the philosophy telling you that. Hedonism, you get the opportunity to tell yourself that. You get the opportunity to explore yourself over that because you're not writing off your passions. You see. Now, I know I'm getting like all kind of hot and bothered and heated up and everything. Understand, emailer, I love your question. I told you that. I just, what really comes up for me, when I start talking about hedonism is the reasons that I cling so much to it, because so much of society tells you that so many of your passions, from the simplest passion of eating a chocolate chip or, of eating a peanut butter whoopie pie, to the larger passions of being in an orgy or something, are wrong. So it gets me heated up. Anyway, I kind of hope that answered the question. Like I said, this is something that I've wanted to do, like just a huge episode around, going more into the history of it. But I tried to be very brief and tried to describe a lot of this stuff for you. And I hope it helps. I hope it's what you were looking for. I apply it by accepting my passions and then being able to look at them, instead of just writing them off because society tells me they're bad or because the country I happen to live in thinks that it's bad, or something like this. Like that. That's how hedonism can get applied. Do I have, say debaucherous sexual adventures? I certainly have. But I don't but they're my experience. And I personally make sure, because it's just as important to me having a good time, that everybody else is having a good time when I'm rocking that shit too. You see how logically hedonism plays in? It's amazing. Do I want the future to be a better place than the world I live in now? Absolutely, because that's the world I want to live in. I want to live in a better world. Now, I don't plan on dying, of course, either. I think, transhumanism's a thing. Not exactly the transhumanism that most people describe, but regardless, I do that simply not out of some like stoic desire to, oh yes, the world must be better when I leave it. Or I need to think about tomorrow. It's not that. It's just that that's what I'd want to live in. So I'm trying to create it right now. That is my debaucherous desire, is to have a peaceful planet. Oh, how terrible. Oh. You don't need to have this, you don't need to feel a need or to have some kind of philosophy telling you need to be worried about tomorrow to have a better tomorrow. And that's one, that was one of the big pulls to me for anarchism, is that, it was that great crucible of truth where you hammered everything out and you got rid of all the non-essentials. And you struck the root, right? You strike the root. And what's left when you get to the root, and what can grow from that root when you finally realize what it is? That's exciting. That's the stuff but you got to get to that point. You've got to, and you've got to have that basis. You cannot just be constantly stepping back, okay, from, say, if you were a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, and you're just constantly like a little bit, okay, yeah, no, I'm like this. Oh, now I'm like this. Eventually you got to get to the point where it's like, okay, look, I think, all of these different philosophies or ideologies or whatever, they were, there's something off about all of them. And so I'm going to get to the root of this, and then I'm going to go from there. And that's what anarchism for me was all about. That was, I think, in my opinion, and I think there's actually a lot of evidence in what scant writings have survived because authoritarians burned it all, okay? What scant evidence survives is that hedonism in and of itself is anarchism. They are one and the same, and there's other people you can read. I've mentioned his name a few times. There's Michel Onfray, who does work on this. There's a few others out there. As I tried to connect, Max Stirner, I think, effectively, espouses hedonism. So there you have it. I'm going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it at that. And if people have more particular questions, or if you disagree with me, please go ahead, disagree. Tell me your disagreement, and I will discuss it. All right? And especially if you're a Sovereign Tech listener, look, I don't hate you. Okay? Just like this listener was asking, tell me, what do you think about hedonism? Blah, blah. They're just asking the question. I got, heated up, but I wasn't heated up at the listener. Go ahead and tell me. Instead of walking away, and saying, this guy is crazy, why don't you try having the conversation? So anyway, all right, real quick. I want to get this episode released, but I'm going to switch it up real quick. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a Star Wars update here, okay? So we're going to end off with something a little fun. I just finished Catalyst, which is this is the prequel novel. So spoiler alert, folks. Spoiler alerts. Here you go. I finished Catalyst, which is the prequel novel to Star Wars Rogue One. Now, I already have my tickets for Rogue One. I am going on December 15th at 7 p.m. Woo, I cannot wait. Day early, but everybody's pretty much offering it a day early. It's supposed to come out on the 16th, right? So I read Catalyst, and it's a good book. I don't think, and I kind of wish you did. I don't think you need it to probably appreciate Rogue One when it comes out. And I'll tell you right now that I guess that'll be episode 204. I am going to do what I did with The Force Awakens, where half of the episode I am going to dedicate to a review of the new Star Wars movie. I will do that every single time, every year. So anyway, so Rogue One coming up. I'm going to catch it. I will do a review of it on the main Sovereign Tech feed. Absolutely. Catalyst, though, I think it gives a lot of it does give some interesting backstory, but I'm not really going to give anything away in it. And it's not something you're not going to find out next week anyway. And, I don't have any more information than you do, really. But I noticed a trend. I'm just going to say this about Star Wars novels, is that other than a couple of them, and the couple of them being, I guess maybe Tarkin, Lords of the Sith, and Dark Disciple. That's more than a couple of them. But I don't know if Tarkin even does it, but Dark Disciple might be the one exception to this. Lords of the Sith was just cool. like that book is just cool. That kind of stands out on its own. But a problem I'm noticing with a lot of Star Wars multimedia, books, comics, and all this, is that there's really not, like, and this was true with Catalyst too, like any event that actually matters, that's going to have any kind of bearing on the larger Star Wars universe or on the movies or TV shows or something like this, I feel like it's like it's all in the last paragraph, or in like the last chapter of all these books. Like the Ahsoka book was all right, it was good, but like anything that actually mattered, anything that people wanted to even really talk about, was literally in the last chapter of the book. Not even the last chapter, like the last paragraph maybe. And I'm noticing that being a trend. Like anything that has bearing, like I said, on the larger Star Wars universe, it's right there. And I'm a little annoyed by this. The books are great, largely, not all of them are great, but the books are, I've reviewed them already on a previous Q&A. Okay, the books are enjoyable. The writing's fine, largely, minus maybe some, like that first Aftermath book. I don't have any problem there, but I really just feel like you're not really like getting any meat of anything. Now, I have a theory behind this. And I think that after episode 8, or at least episode 9, which fortunately it'll just be a couple years, I think after you get to those, then the books will have a lot more to say. Like then they'll be able to explore, speaking of philosophy, a lot of the philosophies within Star Wars, and there's a lot. Okay, but then and they'll be able to they're just going to be able to go deeper. You just really can feel that they have to hold back, and they're just letting in little nuggets of little tidbits of interesting information and factoids, that exist within the canonical Star Wars universe. You feel, that's all you're getting, and it's a little fucking annoying. Fortunately, I don't really read. I listen to the Star Wars books. I listen to the audiobooks, and so I can knock them out in just a few hours because I listen to that 2.3x or 2.5x or something, and. While they're good, some of them better than others, certainly. I really do feel like, aside from Dark Disciple and Lords of the Sith is kind of a unique one, like you get very small, interesting tidbits of information, and you want so much more. Like if these books are that was kind of the big deal. Is like these are canonical, they are important, they are a big deal in the universe. Like then give me more, tell me more. Like in Lords of the Sith was, probably one of the best nuggets of information, but it was literally a chapter. And they didn't explore it at all. And what was fascinating in Lords of the Sith, and the only thing that makes it break the rule of all the other books that I'm describing is that it wasn't in the last part of the book. It was like in the middle of the book is where they gave this really impressive nugget of information. And the nugget being, again, spoiler alerts here, folks. The nugget of information being, why is Palpatine doing what he's doing? What is his goal? What is the goal of the Empire? Is he really just that power hungry? Or he just wants to conquer everything? Like, what's the deal? Like, he doesn't seem to be like that. He's not bloodthirsty. Otherwise, he'd be out in the field himself, right? So, like, what's the deal here? And Lords of the Sith finally, or no, it wasn't Lords of the Sith. I'm sorry. It was Tarkin. The book Tarkin finally describes why that is. And what it is that he wants to literally control the universe, the very fabric of the universe. And the only way he can do that is if through just ultimate authoritarianism, which of course the Empire in many ways represents. If everybody is doing exactly what he says, that's how he can finally, it's kind of like The Secret. It's sort of like the law of attraction. That at least that's the way I interpreted what was being said in Tarkin. Again, it's only a fucking paragraph. They give us just these little tidbits when there's no reason. If you're letting the cat out of the bag, fucking explain it, guys. Right? Tarkin was that James Luceno? The guy's one of the best Star Wars authors of all time. Let him go. Let him do it. Set him loose. And so he... you find out that Palpatine, that's what he wants, is he wants like this ability to literally mold the universe to his desires. And he's going to do that by having total control. It's interesting. And the real pity is that, speaking of James Luceno, who wrote Tarkin, like his book, Darth Plagueis, that's one of those like 3 or 4 books where I'm like, yeah, those should be in the canon, even though they're not. Like Shadows of the Empire should be in the canon and others. Because like when you read the book for Darth Plagueis, which is one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, even though it's not canon anymore, you kind of find out with Plagueis, like his ability, which was Palpatine's master, Sith master, his ability to, to bring like people back from the dead and all this. Actually, like in Plagueis, you get the sense that it comes from the fact that he doesn't care about anything else. As to where Palpatine is the antithesis of this idea, is that I will be able to control everything by controlling everything. As to where Plagueis was, I can literally create life by letting go. By not worrying anymore and all this. Which is really interesting, and actually kind of plays into sort of what we were talking about with hedonism. The good life comes from worrying about your damn self. So, anyway, so just for fun, I'm just bringing it up. Catalyst, I definitely can see where it's going to add a lot more to the movie if you read it beforehand. And if you grab the Audible book, you have time, or even if you're a fast reader, you've got time. It's not really that long of a book. But very, very good. I very much enjoyed it. Definitely one of the better Star Wars novels. There is just that overarching annoyance with all of them, except for Dark Disciple, which is my favorite of the new. Dark Disciple and Lost Stars, my 2 favorite, because neither of those fall prey to this problem. There is this overarching problem of like, they're just giving you nuggets of interesting new information. And they know that's why you're there, because you're wanting to find out, like, how did Ahsoka get white lightsabers? Well, you don't know until the last goddamn chapter. How did Ahsoka become Fulcrum? Well, you don't know until the last fucking chapter. Like, just get to the point, Mahalo. Right? So, anyway, that's my only annoyance with this stuff, is give more payoffs in these books. They're doing it right. I think it's right for them. Don't do more than a book a month. Even a book a month is too much. Keep these things special. Like that became a huge flaw with the previous expanded universe. Was there like, not that there was so much shit, it was just that like it came out so fast. Like there was no way you could catch up. Let people catch up, especially if anything, at least keep a special until episode 9. Because when episode 9 hits, there's going to be people that are going to watch that trilogy probably for the first time, and let them catch up. Give them that opportunity. But not just that, just don't do too much more. Because, again, like, it's actually annoying. I get that you're probably, like, being sparing in what new information you want to release, because you are on this monthly schedule or, somewhat monthly schedule. Just make it a lot more rare, and just make each book hold a lot more, so that those books have a lot more meaning. Put a lot more meat in the books, a lot more interesting, information about the Star Wars universe in the books. That's really my hope. But, they're definitely they're approaching the upper limit of how often I think these things should come out. I certainly, admittedly, and there's some I can't wait for it to come out. Don't misunderstand me. Like the Thrawn book, give it to me, baby. Right now. I can't wait till April. But anyway, so Star Wars is looking good. Bottom line, everything, I'm still largely appreciating what they have going on with Star Wars, with the Star Wars universe, and can't wait for Rogue One. I will be giving my review, as I've said on previous Q&As. There's a chance this could be the greatest Star Wars movie of all time. I'm very open to that. I said that months ago on Q&A. So anyway, there you go. Enough of that. Enough for this week. Of course, there'll be a new Sex and Science Hour, and there will be a new Sovereign Tech this week. Can't wait for you to hear it. I'll see you on the other side, everybody.
You just experienced Sovereign Tech. Go to sovereigntech.com, that's SOVRYN tech.com, and connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovereign Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.